So I'm going to talk about tackling tech debt. And I want to just first up recognize that I'm in a position of privilege when I talk about tech debt because I am a CTO. I'm the one the board looks at and says, what the hell has happened here? I'm the one that gets to fundamentally decide whether we attack tech debt or not. And so I want to reassure you as I go into this talk that I haven't written this from the perspective of only a CTO. I appreciate that not everybody is in the position of being able to just say we're going to do it. And so this is a talk which is all about how to get tech debt dealt with, even if you're not in that position. As Nikita said, I'm CTO at Pleo. I've had a weird career. I started out at Procter & Gamble, which is the largest consumer goods company in the world. So almost like half the store, if you go to the grocery store, is made by P&G. But that made me very good at tech debt because I started out my career working on systems that were older than I was. Legitimately, when I was in my first couple of years at P&G, I worked on a system called Cosmos, which was on a mainframe that had 2 power backups because if the mainframe ever went down, they had no way of restoring the system. So when you think you have tech debt problems, I promise you there are multi-billion-dollar corporations that have even worse tech debt problems than you. But I started out as a hardware hacker. I'm South African originally, despite my adoption of my wife's very British middle-class accent. My fun fact about myself is I built part of South Africa's first satellite as a teenager. So I have great parenting advice, which is don't let your kids do anything cool when they're young. I sold something that went into space when I was 16, and it's all been fucking downhill since then. I've worked at a number of different places, including Monzo, which was a wonderful time because there was no tech debt to deal with almost. And I'm also really proud of having been involved with LeadDev for the last 9 years. But let's get started. What is tech debt? From my definition, tech debt is anything that makes code either difficult to understand, so you look at it and you're just perplexed, difficult to scale, so just putting it on a bigger and bigger box isn't doing it anymore, or difficult to change, or dangerous to change in many cases. I think we've all had the experience of looking at code and looking like this, right? Where you just go, what was this person thinking? And I think tech debt happens for the same reason that financial debt happens. And actually, when you talk about tech debt with your organization, this is my top tip for you, is talk about it the same way you would talk about financial debt. It happens because we need or want something now, but we can't really afford to pay for it in some way or another. And though it's very tempting to always just say, shut up and take my money, it's not evil or stupid to borrow against the future. Sometimes it's really, really sensible to build something in a quick and dirty way. If we don't know whether it's going to meet the needs of customers, if we're not sure we're going to have product market fit, if we need to test something out, these are all good reasons to build something in a way that is not long-term sustainable, that is not long-term scalable, that is not going to be easy to change in the future. We've all put in hard-coded value when it should have been a variable. We've all made structural mistakes in our code. We've all forgotten to do domain-driven design and make things properly separated, right? But it becomes a problem when our interest payments get too large, or when we get to the point, which is really bad, where you're putting your mortgage on a credit card. When you're paying off debt with even more debt is very problematic. But it's all a matter of perspective. I think it's very, very easy to assume that your predecessors were idiots. And it's very tempting to come into a new situation and just be like, oh, the morons that came before me really, really, really messed this up, and now I have to deal with their mess. But I think for every set of people who are desperately trying to build the right thing for customers, trying to figure out product market fit, trying to make sure that something is sensible and useful, there's another team of people that are going to come later looking back on them with a very different perspective, right? Thinking that they were Muppets. And this is one reason, and this is a whole separate talk, but it's one reason that architectural decision records are magic. If you have architectural decision records, then they not only give you the why of the decisions that were made and the choices that were made, but they also give you the context to those choices. And that context, as it changes, going back and being able to say, the context is different now, the decision would be different now, or, the context hasn't changed. It's not actually possible to do this in a better way yet, is really, really valuable. So you can both reevaluate, but also just understand what was happening. And the reality of the matter is we don't all have the benefit of starting greenfield. There's been 2 times in my career where I've managed to really start greenfield. The first was Gov.uk, where we were setting out to prove that agile ways of working could really work for the UK government. And it was a huge success. Saved over £1 billion a year for the government in total once Gov.uk was delivered, and delivered in a way that was modern, that deployed multiple, hundreds of times a day, in fact. When I was at Monzo, it was a similar story. But the reality for most of us is that we don't get to start greenfield. Some of us get to work on stuff that's so legacy it's vintage. I genuinely worked on systems that were older than me when I was at P&G. And that's not, maybe not the typical example, but it is very possible for code to live a lot longer than you anticipate that it will. And so in terms of thinking about tech debt, I want to zoom out for a second and talk about what makes up developer experience. And so this is from a seminal paper on DevX from Dr. Nicole Fosgren and friends, which basically says that there are 3 things that really matter for developer experience, and those are fast feedback loops, low cognitive load, and achieving a flow state. And so feedback loops is how quickly do you get feedback on whether you're doing the thing right or wrong. In our case, in code, that tends to be how quickly are your tests passing or failing. Cognitive load is how difficult is the code itself to understand. How much do you have to load into your brain in order to be able to work on this particular piece of the system or the software. And then flow state is how can you get into that state where you are challenged enough for it to be interesting, good enough at it that you can achieve what you need to, but the challenge isn't set at the wrong level so that you're bored, right? And that perfect mix of challenge and capability leads to flow state, where you just feel like time is passing so easily, you're rocking it, you're making things better, you're in this wonderful state of being that is, what I think we all aspire to having in our work lives, but find in reality doesn't happen all that often. And the worst kind of tech debt affects all 3 of those things that matter for developer experience. If it's untested, you have very poor feedback loops. If it's complex or complicated, you have very high cognitive load. And if it's undocumented, then you are always going to struggle to get into a flow state because you're going to run across things that you can't understand or don't understand, and you don't have anything to refer to. You don't have something to go back to and say, what is this? Why is it this way? And so, as I mentioned, I've dealt with a lot of legacy in my life, but at Pleo, the company I'm at right now, we had a case that was exactly like this. When I joined, the villain of the story was a system called, a monolith called Deimos, that in many ways had made the company succeed. And it's the largest spend management company in Europe, has today like 40,000 customers, has huge number of daily active users, and this monolith contained all of the core functionality of the company. And running code is successful code, even if it's terrible. It's delivering value, right? But Deimos was difficult to understand. It was described to me as spaghetti code. It was poorly structured, poorly documented. It was difficult to scale. We had been putting it on bigger and bigger boxes for years, and we were now hitting the point where just putting it on a bigger box, like, we're going to need a bigger boat, wasn't a successful strategy anymore. And it was, worst of all, difficult to change. So every time we changed Deimos, we pretty consistently caused a major incident. People got really, really scared about touching anything in the monolith because they were so sure that they were going to break something because it was so difficult to understand and difficult to scale. They were not going to have the benefit of additional headroom from a scaling point of view, and they were going to miss something when they made a change. And some of my team are here. If you happen to be sitting next to them, you'll see their faces turning whiter at the mention of Deimos, because that tended to be the reaction to it in the company. And so when I took over as CTO, not only was Deimos the villain of the story, but they had also tried to kill it 2 or 3 times already at the point that I arrived. And so we really, really needed to get it right this time. This was the last time we were going to get any opportunity to deal with it before we lost complete credibility. And that was quite a terrible situation to come into, if I'm honest, and not exactly what was represented to me in the interview process. Nobody admits to you in the interview process that it's all a flaming pile of garbage and desperately needs to be fixed, right? So what did we need to do? A huge rewrite was super appealing. Everybody wants to just go, we'll just leave this on the side, we'll start over again, and it'll all be better the next time. Who's been around in a company long enough to see the next time become legacy? Yeah? Second system syndrome, right? But big rewrites always take longer than you want them to. They're incredibly difficult to estimate, even in probabilities, as Luis talked about yesterday. And they can kill companies. Because all the time that you're spending, all the energy that you're spending, all of the opportunity that it's costing to do that big rewrite is stopping you from building features for your customers and keeping up with your competition. And so I advise against big rewrites. They're very difficult to get right. They're very easy to turn into a death march where everybody feels like they're on a never-ending treadmill of awfulness. And so in dealing with tech debt, I've got a sort of 5-step approach that I think works.
I really hope you're enjoying this video. Do you know LeadDev offers way more than this?
I'm a fan of the LeadDev newsletter. I find really practical knowledge about leadership.
Then I was like, oh, there is this big community here doing all of these content, so let me figure out a little more, let me dig in a little, what do you have?
So make sure you check out LeadDev.com.
And this is what we've done at Pleo. We start by visualizing the problem. If you can't see it, you can't change it. We then benchmarked against industry, evangelized and explained to the company, but also to the senior people in the company and in the board. I secured us some air cover, but didn't take us off to sit in the corner and just rewrite things for 9, 12, 24 months, and then delivered the hell out of it. And so we started, as I said, by visualizing the problem. We looked at our DORA metrics. We use Swarmia, but there are a number of other options that are available. And our cycle time was 5.6 days, which I think we can all agree is pretty freaking terrible. And so we started off by saying, okay, we're already slower than we'd like in building new things. And I haven't shown them here, but the rest of the DORA metrics were predictably as bad. We then benchmarked against industry, and this helped us mostly not with the engineers in the team, but with the product managers, the executives, and the board. Because being able to say, hey, we want to be a great company, we want to be a world-class solution for our customers, we can't do that if we are needs improvement or fair according to external benchmarks. This is from a Linear B, I think, report that was published. One of my investors decided that that's what they were going to use to measure us, and so I've adopted it. And this really helped my executive team and our board to better understand how big the problem was and how much it was slowing the team down. Because if you fundamentally believe that you've got a decent team, but they're performing in ways that are, needs improvement on a comparison scale to all other parts of the industry, then something needs to change. And then we evangelized and explained. A lot of people within the company heard the phrase tech debt, but didn't really know what it meant. And this financial debt metaphor helped folks from, everybody in engineering and product and design and data. All of those folks could quite easily understand what tech debt was. But we got to the point where even the average salesperson understood what tech debt was. We at one point had to tell sales that they couldn't tell customers about Deimos, which was a weird all hands for me, I'll admit. But we talked about Deimos and the problems it was causing, the fact that it was the reason things were so unstable, that it was causing so many incidents, and that it was stopping us delivering new features. Because I think when we talk about tech debt, often the perception from others is that we're engineers who want everything to be perfect. And so we want to go and spend time on making the tech perfect rather than spending time on making things that are great for customers. And showing that tech debt was causing us to not be able to make things great for customers was the real breakthrough moment, I think. And then what I did was, this is the part which I appreciate you can't all individually do, because you can't necessarily just go up to your board and say, hey, fire me in a year if this isn't fixed. But that's what I did. I went and I said, we need at least half of our time to be spent on fixing this. And we're not going to go sit in the corner and do that. We're going to do it while delivering new customer features. But we need this time. And I can't deliver what you need for customers, what we need to do for our customers, unless we get this time to pay down tech debt as well. And having secured that air cover, had to really go and deliver. So we set out an API first strategy. We did a full program of training because we had a number of engineers who, if not, they weren't conceptually opposed to an API-first approach, but they hadn't necessarily lived in one before. They hadn't experienced it before. They'd, after all, been living in this spaghetti code monolith for a long time. We use Skiller Whale, but again, there's a number of options available to do training with your team. And we upskilled all of our engineers in how to build good APIs, in how to refactor and take things out from a monolith into a more modular approach. And then we pulled pieces out of Deimos into proper APIs. Now, we had the advantage that the company strategy at this time included that we wanted to externalize a number of APIs so that we could have third parties and partners and customers built on top of Clio as well. And so this happened to be quite a good time to bring that business strategy and technical strategy together. And then we API'd all the things. So what was once just this huge monolith that did everything became this 20-odd set of APIs that have been built by a number of different teams over time. And the next two slides are genuine, exactly what I had in my board deck slides. So this one is one that shows that in 2023, 80% of the development on our core product verticals was held back by tech debt. So everything that's in red here, we couldn't fix or improve or build on because of tech debt, because of Deimos. And then there were a couple of areas that were less affected. And it also helped that the board could see that in those couple of areas that were less affected, we had made a lot more progress. And so we were able to say, look, if you want us to go as fast as we do over here across the board, then you just need to give us this time, help us be able to deliver as effectively and as efficiently across the board. And then we've shown actual improvement as it happens. So one of the main things that was in Deimos was our reviews. So if you spend something, then somebody needs to approve it. And making it so you could send it to your boss or your department head or to a budget owner or whatever else was all stuck in this monolith. The top graph is very beautiful. Latency dropped hugely at the point that we moved reviews over to the new services. And then we've been tracking over time, even though our business has grown by 40%, Deimos traffic has reduced by almost half at this point. So we're not at the end of this journey yet, but we have made significant progress. But I think the most important thing that we did was that we didn't go do a big rewrite. We didn't go off into the corner and say, don't bother us, we're busy. like a lot of teams do for 9, 12, 24 months. We delivered customer value all along the way, including some long-awaited features that had been blocked by Deimos. And I think before we took this approach, people would have hacked together a way to make reviews and those other features happen, but they would have done it within the context of that monolith and caused even more incidents and even more tech debt. Over time, we've reduced our cycle time by 40%. We're now at 3.2 days. Actually, the latest numbers are 2.5 days, which is still not great. I would like that to be under 2 days, but it's hugely better than it was. And then with the team at the same size, we have more than doubled throughput. So throughput's up 270% with the team static. And so that's all us improving the capability and capacity of our current team, as Arena spoke about yesterday, without needing to add more people. But it would have been much better if we'd never gotten into this situation in the first place. And so how do we tame tech debt on a daily basis? Is it inevitable? I think tech debt is somewhat inevitable. It's very rare to find someone who completely lives within their means and never uses a credit card, never uses any debt of any description. But you want it to be more like a mortgage on a pretty low, affordable, workable interest rate rather than a really high interest rate like you get on a credit card. As I said earlier, I think that it's very advantageous to have the seniority to just say that something must happen, but I think dealing with tech debt on a regular basis is actually much better and is much more doable if you are a tech lead, an EM, an eng director, or just an engineer in a regular team. And so let's think back to those three things that matter for developer experience: feedback loops, cognitive load, and flow state. So for feedback loops, we need to add tests where they're missing. For cognitive load, refactor complex and complicated code. And there's a measure called CRAP, which I can never remember what it stands for, so somebody will have to Google that and post it in LinkedIn. But there's a measure now that you can get in your IDE that will tell you, it will highlight for you when there's too many branches in the code, when there's too much complexity, when there's not enough testing. And so these top two things you can get in your IDE as you're coding for it to alert you to the fact that things are too complex or complicated or not tested enough. And then for flow state, you add documentation. But the great news is that doing these things helps you to grapple with code that you're unfamiliar with anyway. And so it will make you deliver faster if you start by dealing with tech debt. Build, refactor, and then let platforms emerge. As Lisa talked about yesterday, it's really easy to plan a big platform or service catalog up front. But it's much better to build a couple of times and then find what emerges as a platform instead. It's worthwhile putting an expiry date on any necessary dirty hacks. This is what we all do in our code. We put / to do in all caps, right? And when you come across a / to do when you're 2 years later, it distresses you. So put / to do before September 2025. Just make it a little bit easier to keep track of how long you've left things for. Don't wait for permission to improve things. Adopt the Boy Scout rule. Build improvement in. There's a great Kent Beck article about refactoring not being on the backlog and how it shouldn't be on the backlog. We should estimate it in to the estimates that we're giving to our product colleagues as we go. Whenever you've got a monolith, try to refactor it. Start consuming your APIs internally as well as externally, and just eat your own dog food, right? But fundamentally, be ready that there's going to be some convincing needed. You're going to have to explain and show that this is a problem in order to get people to work with you and to give you time and space to do things. My wife would tell you that this swan is my patron saint. I used to be a bouncer. I don't have a flight mode. I only have fight mode. And so, to close, in dealing with tech debt, First up, visualize the problem. If you can't measure it, you'll never show improvement and you'll never get the time and the air cover that you need to get it done. Secondly, benchmark against industry, showing that you're not as good as other teams at your competitors and other companies is a very good way to get people more senior than you to understand, accept, and prioritize. Evangelize and explain. Don't treat people like they're too stupid to understand what tech debt is. Just find ways to explain it in their language. Secure some air cover, but don't go hide in the corner and do a big rewrite. I promise you, it will not work out the way that you hope it will. And then make sure that you deliver the hell out of it. On that note, thank you very much.